All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started? I know it takes a little time to do intros, but I figured it's a small enough group and always makes a big difference just to know who folks are and feel a little more connected. So nice to
Totally.
meet everyone.
Wonderful. Just want to say thank you to everyone. Having a little issues. It's bizarre not being able to see your faces. So I'm also tuned in on my phone so that I can see all of you that are joining, and so glad to see those that are returning, and just excited to have you all joining us today. And also our very special guest, Alicia English. She is a senior design researcher here at IDEO. And of course, we have Larry Corio, the program manager, and myself, the community manager for the program and for the challenge. And so for today, we're going to talk about impact and uncommon measures and how do we track our impact. But first, we are going to start off with a creative warm-up. Alicia is going to guide us through drafting and crafting headlines for the future. Larry is going to give an overview of the reopen, what we're looking for solutions, some inspiration, and Alicia and Larry will give some examples of some MVPs or what great solutions could potentially look like. Then we will go into an exercise and activity around identifying uncommon measures and how to measure impact. We will go into a Q&A after that because we would love to help support you in refining your ideas before the final deadline. And then of course, we'll close with what to do next. Fantastic. So I will pass it to Alicia to walk us through how to craft headlines for the future.
All right. Amazing. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in. We did intros. I'm sure several of you may have done headlines from the future before, but this is an IDEO favorite, also just a design favorite when we really think about visioning. And I love this specifically in thinking about impact as just a moment to dream. In an ideal world, we all have these solutions. What is possible? So if this idea is successful, if your solution is implemented, imagine that it is implemented at a scale that is like even beyond your own wildest imagination. What would that headline say about the impact of your idea? So if you're successful, what could that outcome look like? And you can think about that locally within the household, or you could think of it really big. So I think for the purposes of this, we'll come up with a few. Maybe we can get some music just for like a minute and 30 seconds. I don't want to give us too much and overthink it, but we'll take 90 seconds. If you have paper, I see, Erin, you're already jotting some things down, it looks like. If you have paper, feel free to jot it down. And then we'll come back together in 90 seconds and share some of our ideas in the chat. Are there any questions on this exercise? All right, encourage you to dream big. Yeah, 45 more seconds. Okay, go ahead wherever you are. You want to wrap up final thoughts? I see some heads down still, which is totally fine. I would encourage you to start picking a favorite, one that stands out. Maybe there's one that you generated where you're like, this is the one. And I'm going to invite everyone to just share in the chat a favorite headline. If you have two, I'm like, if you're like me, you have a hard time deciding. So 1 to 2, you can share 1 to 2 favorite headlines you came up with in the chat. And then if anyone actually is really excited to share one or wants to share with their group, I think we have a minute to share if someone wants to come off mute and share. A courageous spirit.
I'd be willing to share.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy.
So what I came up with, I will put it in the chat. Oh, hit send or return. Unexpected pandemic outcomes, smart classrooms integrated with virtual sign language interpreting services. So I teach at Cal State Northridge. We are the largest population of individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing outside of Gallaudet University. It is not unusual actually it is unusual for me to not have an interpreter. There was one semester where it was a 3-hour class. And so by law, we needed 2 interpreters so that they would have enough time in between signing to take the breaks that are needed. And so I had 2 sign language interpreters, a real-time captionist, and a service dog in one class of 30 students. And that doesn't account for the different accommodations that are through our disability resources and education services. So this is something I've been looking at since I was the president of my sorority as an undergrad at Cal State Northridge, where I fought to have interpreters initiated into the Greek system to provide greater access to people who wanted to have experience in the Greek system that was not part of the deaf organizations. And so, yeah, this is, as soon as I saw the Facebook sponsored post for this project, I was like, okay, this might be a way to do this, or at least bring some traction to it on my campus that would allow it to be looked at in more serious ways than Wendy has another idea.
I love this. Wendy, thank you. First of all, it's amazing. I love this vision. I think it's necessary. And also just thank you for all the work that you've done and for sharing a little bit about your background and experience.
Thanks.
Yeah. Maybe one more person. Oh, this is cool. I see in the chat. If you want to keep sharing in the chat, and if one more person wants to share off mute, I want to make sure we have time to get into the rest of the exercises, but these are amazing. Always love just the inspiration in here.
I'll go.
Awesome.
And mine is about, today happens to be the NFL draft. And so in my perfect world, all of our STEM students will be drafted into NCAA programs and colleges, big time colleges, just like they are in football and basketball that we hear about, and into big time companies, and they will be recruited like we recruit athletes.
I love this. Sorry, I am personal thing, work from home life. So I'm sorry, I got a little distracted for just a second. Thank you so much, Nancy. Beautiful.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Alicia, for getting our brains going. And I also just want to give a special shout out to Christine. Hello, so wonderful to meet you and so glad to have you on the call. It's so wonderful to see our community that we are engaging with so much on the platform joining us for these sessions. And now we'll pass it off to Larry to give us a background on the Education Reopen.
Sure. So amazing to be here with you all. You will hear it again, I'm sure, at least 2-3 more times from us. Whatever time it is during your day, this is a wild time for people. And it is not lost on us that making time for things that feel additional and that feel maybe outside of our daily routine is a very special thing right now. And so I think it speaks to where our attention is, and it speaks to this moment. And so what I'm going to chat about actually isn't news to us here necessarily, but the Education Reopen, which folks here now have either submitted to, and so you're pretty familiar with it, or maybe you're about to, and so gaining a little bit of knowledge would be helpful. It's an attempt at meeting a really crucial moment for schools and school communities. For those who are associated with schools, you know this intimately. For those who are supporting schools, you also know this well. Maybe you're a parent of a student who's going through the school experience right now. There is a real opportunity right now and a real crisis right now taking place in school communities across the United States and world. And the Education Reopen is an opportunity to elevate the solutions of folks who are making hundreds, thousands of creative decisions every day, which is folks who are supporting schools, folks who are in schools, educators, students, families, people who support school communities. This is where innovation comes from. And yet it has taken place in isolation, largely because a lot of us have gone into isolation, right? In virtual spaces that we are not as used to in terms of connecting with each other. So the Reopen is a real chance to reconnect and to provide a space for innovative solutions to surface. And specifically, if you go to the next slide, Danielle, to surface around our core challenge question, which for those who are familiar with open innovation design challenges is framed as a how might we question. So here it is for those who aren't familiar with the Reopen challenge question. How might we strengthen school communities as sites reopen by highlighting solutions that reconnect people and enhance collective well-being, teaching and learning? And one thing to add here, we've heard from some folks like our schools are already open in our community, or, oh gosh, we're actually not going to reopen until the fall, probably. Across the board, actually, whether you've been fully virtual, hybrid, back in person for some time now, we think that there is innovation that actually is happening in all those spaces, regardless of where you are in the physical reopening process. And there's no constraint on who can submit from that perspective. It's just a really interesting moment right now as a lot of school communities are in this space and thinking about how they can continue to be nimble. All right, next slide, Danielle. The Education Reopen is, again, an invitation for solutions. That is essentially what we are doing here. We are crowdsourcing the emerging or the already existing solutions that you and folks like you have been implementing in and alongside school communities to support connection and support innovation within schools this past year and possibly even before that. We're interested, you may have seen some reference to Los Angeles on the website. A lot of our sponsors and partners come from the Los Angeles area. And for context, LA is actually going through the process of school reopening as we speak, physical reopening as we speak. And so that's a little bit of the reason that you see designing for the LA space in particular. But we're very clear that actually we're looking for ideas from anywhere that can impact school communities anywhere. And so the Open IDEO community, the Teachers Guild and School Retool community, however you heard about this from whatever network, we're really excited for the solutions to come from everywhere and be in service to everywhere as well. And our goal with this is to elevate not a few solutions, but actually a whole bunch of solutions, high quality solutions that we're going to feature in something we're referring to as the Solution Exchange. And there are some incentives tied to that, which I'll refer to a little bit later, but financial incentives, every solution that gets featured gets $1,000 US and a bunch of non-financial incentives as well. So that is the call. Specifically for your solutions, a few of our categories for design opportunity areas for design or themes are around communities reconnecting with each other, right? Coming back into the space together and developing new or different types of relationships as you become used to becoming in the same physical space again and get used to continuing to engage virtually. The second theme is around collaborative teaching, learning, and leadership. There's a real opportunity right now to reset ownership of decisions within schools, ownership of learning within schools. And we've seen some really amazing innovations around encouraging new collaborations between, for instance, teachers and families, right? Parents have been thrust into some really formal education roles, right? Given that students are engaging in virtual learning at home and needing different types of supports. And so that's just one example of some of the new types of collaboration and interdependencies that are existing within school communities now. And then the third theme, we've heard amazing solutions and really important ones that have focused on collective health and well-being. Let's just call it what it is. A lot of students and families have experienced trauma this past year. And it's really important, actually, that it's not, is it learning or is it mental health and well-being? It's how do we balance these? How do we continue to balance these alongside each other? And not in ways where we dump all the responsibility on one person, but where we share responsibilities across stakeholders here. And so ideas that fall into this area, of course, are ones that we're interested in lifting up. All right. This is small text on a slide, which we understand. This is also available on the Challenge website, of course. These are a couple categories of our evaluation criteria. In other words, what are the criteria against which your solutions will be judged at the end of the open call process? So the first one is around relevance. Simply, does it relate to the challenge question that we posted earlier? The second group here is around impact, and this falls into a couple different categories. One is around evidence of impact. So if the idea has been implemented, is there evidence of that implementation, right? Are there articles that have been written, case studies you can reference, anecdotes even? Would love to hear that, of course. If it hasn't been implemented, is there potential for impact? One thing that I'm going to talk about an idea that was submitted to a previous challenge on the next slide. There is real opportunity to reference ideas that currently work, that maybe has inspired your idea, or conversations that you have that suggest that your idea could be successful. We're really excited about emerging ideas as well as existing ideas. So don't feel like if your idea hasn't been implemented that precludes you from submitting it. Thirdly, does it make school communities more equitable and inclusive for all? We would love for you to be explicit about this in your response, right? Not just that it's designed for everybody necessarily, but specifically in what ways might it advantage students furthest from opportunity and adults and communities furthest from opportunity. And then the last category is about adaptability. And really all of these fall into somewhat similar camps, right? Is my idea something that can work somewhere else is essentially the organizing principle here. And would people be interested in adapting it, right? So that last question around, does it inspire use, right? Does it have resources? Does it have stories? Is it titled appropriately, right? These are the types of things that we might think about as we package our idea and submit it. That's our evaluation criteria. Again, more detail about that on the Challenge website, but we're going to get tangible. We're going to talk about a few ideas now and the specific criteria that we think these ideas hit. So next slide, Danielle. And I'll talk about the first one, which is an idea from a challenge that was run last year by OpenIDEO called the Reimagine Learning Challenge. And the solution is called Oye Profe, Laboratorio Colaborativo de Educación. And it was submitted by an innovator in Lima, Peru. And it is essentially...
I'm sorry, I couldn't contain my excitement because I am from Peru originally.
Oh, amazing. Well, here is an idea that we would love for you to take a look at. It's an idea that is from Peru, but we think actually has a lot of opportunity to scale elsewhere. It was an idea developed during COVID, and it was a way for professional learning communities, which are typical among educators, to be taken online. And so it was prototyped in a virtual space. There were Facebook groups. There were all different kinds of online groups and forums. There's a lot of text on this slide. Don't feel like you have to read it, or on this page. Don't feel like you have to read it. And it met the need that the moment presented right at the beginning of the pandemic. And actually, thank you, Danielle, for going down to the bottom here. It's this section here that I wanted to reference, the last section of the idea, which is tell us a little bit about yourself and what inspired you to share it. So this is an idea that was emerging. So it hadn't been implemented a ton before, right? Hadn't existed before COVID. And what I love about this idea, it gets at that criteria around potential for impact. And what this submitter does is they reference the conversation, essentially the research that they did, the conversations that they had with potential target users, and how those conversations, that design research, went into explicitly the design of this tool, of this solution. So even though there was no, long-term impact that was reported, not many articles written about it, it still didn't prevent this person from talking about how this meets the explicit needs of target audiences based on these conversations that I've had with my user group, right? Which is, without question, a wonderful way of expressing potential for impact that meets that criteria in particular. All right, I'll turn it over to Alicia to talk about another idea as well.
Okay, great. So I am going to be super quick, but I wanted to share this idea as just an example of something I thought was really strong in terms of tracking impact and understanding the impact of her solution, since that's what we're going to transition to in just a moment. So this photo that you see is from a teacher actually based in California, in Oakland. And she was really interested in actually redistributing sort of the power imbalances that exist in the classroom. And she's an elementary school teacher, so she was getting a lot of, Miss Sanders, Miss Sanders, Miss Sanders, can I get this? Can I get that? And for her, it's less related to the pandemic specifically, but I just love this as an idea that actually what she did is created an expert board where it showed what is the expertise of all these common questions that lives in the rooms. What do our students actually know? And she put this board up in her classroom and actually had students, instead of asking her, they would look at the expert board and say, oh, I need help with my math, with multiplication. I'm just making this up. Who's really good at multiplication and said they're expert in this? And they started going to each other. And what she did was actually track over time how many questions each day that she was getting from her students. And she had it mapped out. It was so beautiful, where she noticed there was a decline in the number of times students were actually calling on her for help. And they were actually starting to rely on each other and depend upon each other to collaborate, which is really awesome. So I offer that as just, I thought it was a super simple, creative idea. And I think it's a really tangible example of a creative way to measure if your idea is having the impact that you desire. All right, that's it for Teresa. I'm trying to be real quick.
Thanks, Alicia. Danielle, we'll turn it back to you to get us into really the interactive portion of this.
Just 1 second, I needed to reload the presentation. Thank you.
Oh, sure, you're good, you're good.
So Larry, you did great talking in Spanish. Where do you learn it?
Oh, I wish I could say I knew it. We are raising our daughter bilingual Spanish. My partner is fluent in Spanish. And so I hear almost entirely over the course of the day, Spanish being spoken outside the door.
That's great.
Yep.
Great Spanish.
And I see a question in the chat, Frankie. I think there's a question on how many solutions will be featured at the Solution Exchange.
Yeah, thanks, Frankie. So part of it is there's a threshold of quality that we want to reach. And so we're expecting that it won't be 5 or 10 ideas that are going to meet that threshold of quality. We're hoping for, 40, 50, 60. There are funds available to go as high as 100, actually. And so what we don't want to do is to cut off arbitrarily solutions that have a real chance at impacting school communities. And so there's more opportunity than not, actually, for ideas, so long as they meet a threshold of quality, right? And that's part of the reason that we're even hosting these workshops, is so that you get a visual sense of and a opportunity to ask questions about what we're talking about with the eval criteria. We think there's a real chance that many ideas are going to get featured in this, so long as they meet that threshold.
Thanks, Larry.
Yeah, thanks for asking the question. All right, Danielle, you want to give us a quick intro to the next activity? You're on mute there.
Lots of multimedia, folks.
Oh, you're good.
Sorry.
Thanks for doing it.
You're welcome.
Common measures are likely already in place in your school, things like attendance and grades. And while that information tells a story, it doesn't always help when designing for new behaviors. Uncommon measures can forecast the story before it even happens. It requires making a creative leap to reveal the connections. And just like hacking, is often more iterative and intuitive. So what do uncommon measures look like? In a science museum, can you guess a common group behavior that's a precursor to learning? Groups who laugh spend more time at exhibits and are more likely to talk about what they're learning. Do you know what daily routine can help you be more creative? Studies show getting good sleep enables people to think more abstractly and make new associations, key mindsets for creativity. What habit is a good indicator a person will not default on a loan? Regularly donating to charity. It reveals a person's sense of responsibility. Uncommon measures allow you to tap into behavioral indicators of what's working, what's not, and why. They may not be common, but they are intuitively human. In your school, say you want to increase student agency and trust. Maybe in the future, you want to see students speaking up when they have concerns, or adults responding to student initiatives. Now, let's work backwards. What are possible indicators that you're on track? Certainly, attendance and class participation offer a clue. But let's imagine indicators that forecast agency and trust. It could be a typically disengaged student speaking up in class, or a teacher supporting a student's idea to start a new club. Recently, we spent time understanding high school students through the lens of the lunch experience. You know what revealed the level of trust schools had for their students? Ketchup. During lunch, we noticed if it was locked away or freely available. Did staff trust students to take only what they need? Did custodians trust students not to make a mess? Did students feel respected and in turn respect others? Now, of course, you wouldn't measure the success of a lunch program based on ketchup alone. Rather, it's an indicator, in a moment in time, one clue in a suite of measurements, both common and uncommon. Spotting these indicators takes practice and relies on your intuition, which chances are is already finely tuned. Every day in school, you pick up on subtle interactions, noises, and mood to gauge how things are going. You can make those same intuitive leaps for your measures and iterate them along the way. Now you try it. For your own hack, what's a key behavior you hope to see in the future? What do you think might forecast what's to come? And then go out and observe to test your hypothesis. What do you see? And how does that compare to what you expected?
Thanks a bunch, Danielle. That video was from a program called School Retool, which is a principal fellowship program. And it is a really interesting take on measuring success or lack of success of ideas. And it extends our thinking a little bit beyond traditional metrics of success, which is the goal of what we're going to be talking about here. So I think we bring it up not because it's perfectly applicable to every idea, but we bring it up because the types of things that we're looking for with respect to impact measurement, it doesn't have to be standardized test scores purely. It doesn't have to be randomized controlled trials. It doesn't have to be purely scientific alone, because let's be honest, a lot of emerging ideas may reference things, but they're still prototypey. Right. And that's actually the energy that we're trying to capture right now, and that we don't want to discourage folks from having reflected in their ideas. And so what we're going to have you do actually is we're going to have an activity coming up right now that where uncommon measures of your own solutions. It's going to be one of the things that you're going to be doing some thinking around. And so the hope for this portion of the activity, the interactive portion of the activity today before our Q&A, is that this can become a section that hopefully with a few Mad Libs can become translated, can translate itself into the impact section of your submission. And so right at the end of our call today, the hope is that you'll have crafted something that, oh my gosh, you can't do anything before you go onto the website and include it as the impact section here. And we're really excited that we're gonna have a few minutes here to do some drafting today. So what you have on your screen now is a Mad Lib. I'll ask Alicia if you wouldn't mind dragging maybe some of the prompts down into the chat. So you don't have to answer everything. You can, you're welcome to. The highlighted one here, the ways I know my solution is on the right track, is a reference to a place where you might include some of those uncommon measures or measures of success, right? That we just heard a little bit of description about. But the hope is to give you a moment just to think deeply and to do some writing about how you want to frame the impact of the solution that you're going to submit to the Education Reopen. So we'll put on a little bit of music. Feel free to focus on at least one of these, if not two of these. And at the end of it, we'll ask you to drop what you've written into the chat as well. All right, so Danielle, if I could ask you to throw on a song, maybe a 5-minute song, 4-minute song, let's do it. That should give folks enough time to draft responses to at least one of these. We would encourage you to go for more if you want.
Plants and birds and rocks and things that were sand and hills and rain. The first thing I met was a fly with a buzz and the sky with no clouds. The heat was hot and the ground was dry, but the air was full of sound. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain. After 2 days in the desert sun, my skin began to turn red. After 3 days in the desert fun, I was looking at a riverbed, and the story it told of a river that flowed made me sad to think it was dead. You see, I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain.
My solution makes sense.
After 9 days, I let the horse run free, 'cause the desert had turned to sea. There were plants and birds and rocks and things. There was sand and hills and rings. The ocean is a desert with its life underground and the perfect disguise above. Under the cities lies a heart made of ground, but the humans will give no love. You see, I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. In the desert, you can't remember your name, 'cause there ain't no one for to give you no pain.
All right, let's call it halfway there. Or is that more than halfway? Maybe we'll take 2 more minutes.
I love the song. Whose choice was it?
Oh, we've got a fun mix going on. Get your
Danielle.
going.
Go girl. I love it.
All right, let's take 1 more minute. Finish up that sentence or that group of sentences. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. If folks want to continue to add them there, we'll do our best to respond to them. All right, and let's bring it back together. Thanks, Danielle. Love the vibe of that playlist you have going. I hope it inspired some good thinking around uncommon measures, as well as some of the Mad Lib prompts there about how you might generally just frame impact for your solution that you're submitting in ways that could inspire use, in ways that elevate your target audience, for instance, who you're designing for in it, especially for emerging ideas that haven't been implemented. I love some of what I'm seeing in terms of how you might lift up the voices of who you're designing for based on conversations you have and based on small prototypes that you might be doing of your idea. Maybe it's not at scale yet, but how you might feature those in the impact section of your idea as well. We certainly know that there are many solutions in education that are tried and true, despite being iterated on over time, and we can obviously reference some of the evidence there. But for those emerging ideas, many of which have been designed by folks in this room here or adapted by folks in this room, thinking about how you integrate maybe things that have inspired your idea and the research that supports those, or specifically, information that you gather from your target audience and from some of the initial tests will be really exciting. So wonderful to see what's going on in the chat. We'll transition into kind of a quasi feedback Q&A question and answer session now, which based on last week, let's just have it be open. You're welcome to insert questions in the chat as well. We'll do our best to get back to them as we have. And if you feel like you have something that you've gathered that might be helpful in responding to somebody who asks a question, feel free to offer it to this group too. But certainly we're on hand here to ask any clarifying or any even high level questions. All right, already. Yes, Wendy, easy question to answer. Is there a recording available? There is. Danielle, aside from in an email, where would you recommend that folks gain access to that?
Folks can access the recording from the challenge brief page on the overview page in the FAQ section, in the frequently asked questions section. And if you send an email to educationreopen@ideo.com, I can also make sure that you receive that recording. And they're also posted on YouTube. And so after today, I'll be sure to share the link with everyone. Great. And Jamie, was that the link to the YouTube or to the platform? We'll get both of those for you.
So I have a question because I can already see, I had the initial idea when I saw the Facebook sponsored post and I was like, huh. And then just by spending 52 minutes together today, I was like, but wait, it could be this and this and this and this. How do you reel it in so that you have a focused submission and you're not trying to do too many things at once? Or what advice do you have for people like me who would tend towards trying to solve 1,000 things at once instead of just do one thing really well and then pilot successive things later?
I can offer some initial thoughts on this, but I'd welcome anybody else who also has this same predisposition. But I would say two things come to mind for me. One, the opportunity areas or the themes that we've established are good. They are helpful, even though they are giant buckets, right? Reconnecting communities, collective health and well-being. They hopefully will help narrow. What I'll say is they're much like we say at IDEO, when you're writing down ideas on Post-its, have one idea per Post-it. I would also suggest for solutions, one idea per submission, right? Like one solution per submission, as opposed to trying to fit in, an entire multi-year curricula into a single submission, even though there actually are some submitters that we've seen in the past that can boil down a giant idea, multi-phase idea into a single idea. So feel free to do that. Also, there's nothing that precludes you from submitting more than one idea, Wendy. So if you wanted to submit 2 or 3, you could certainly, or more, right? You could do that as well in case you can't contain yourself. What I will say is there's probably a threshold of completeness, right? Of like thinking and energy that goes into each one, resources. We don't want the quantity of ideas that you submit to take away from the quality of them across the board.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Go for it.
I do feel slightly underinformed, but this is helping as far as just like the submission process. So I submitted an idea partly because I thought you had to in order to come to these sessions. I don't know if that was actually true or not, but okay, not true. I'm hoping that like the submission is malleable until the 14th. Is that the date? Okay, so I can get in there and change it.
That's right. Yep.
And then I noticed in that first example that you shared, Larry, that it almost looked like there was like a pitch deck underneath that like kind of showed more of the process that led to that design. Does that seem like a good approach?
Sure. I mean, again, no prescriptiveness here, like not saying that every idea that has a pitch deck gets elevated, every idea that doesn't. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, resources are helpful, both from a inspiration and from an inspiring kind of criteria, right? Mm-hmm. But also it's just difficult sometimes within the prompts that we provide in the submission form to fully kind of couch all the edges of an idea. And so providing an attachment in case you don't feel like you are able to speak to it fully in the submission form is totally reasonable. If not just pictures, maybe people testing the thing, right? It's not limited just to pitch decks. Are there artifacts of this being implemented? Are there instruments that, different aspects of it that you might lift up as images? Totally.
Great, thank you.
Great. And Christine had a question regarding if her idea is selected for the solutions exchange, will they need to reserve dates, or is there any expectation or time commitment to refinement or anything like that?
No, if it's submitted for the solution exchange, there's no, currently speaking, there's nothing additional that you would have to do beyond that. There will be, I think, real energy around the solution exchange in terms of wanting to potentially adapt these things in different places. Certainly, you might get some emails inquiring about how it went for you, how you might adapt it, if you might talk to somebody about it, right? But we're not obligating anybody to that process necessarily. But the solution exchange will be public, and these ideas are going to be exciting, if they get featured there. And so, no, I would be surprised if people don't get some attention for it.
Well, I was just wondering, like, if there's a specific time, because I'm planning my summer schedule, or something. If or when I don't know.
Oh, so in terms of timing of the release, so we expect that the open call ends on the 14th. We then have evaluation. We expect sometime beginning of June to announce the solutions in the solution exchange. And then probably toward the beginning of the academic year in the fall, in the US at least, there will probably be some revisitation of the solutions, so that as families and students and educators go back to schools, and as we again rearrange ourselves to accommodate for whatever that reality is going to look like then, that there's renewed energy around it too.
Great questions, everyone. And also seeing questions that come up very often around copyright and IP and who owns your idea, and just reiterating from the kickoff workshop and just what Open IDEO and Open Innovation is. You're submitting your idea to an open innovation platform, which is completely public. And so you have to be more mindful of what information you want to share. If there are terms and conditions or any elements of property that you own that you do not want shared publicly, that is completely up to you what you would like to have on the platform. But in and of itself, the Solutions Exchange and Open IDEO are open platforms. So it's you don't give up ownership of your idea, but you do need to be careful about what you share publicly. Great. And then Frankie, curious, could you share more about the review stage, how it's different than the current open stage?
Sure. I'll be real quick. I know we're at time, so if folks need to hop at the top of the hour, feel free to. Maybe after this question, Danielle, we can move quickly just to the call to action, and then we can come back to questions after that if folks want to stay on. The review stage is essentially the evaluation stage, Frankie. And so submission and iteration is intended to take place during the open call phase, right? Like the feedback workshop right now is intended to inspire iteration of your idea right now. Solutions will be locked during the review or evaluation stage. And so really submit, iterate on your idea, do as much as you reasonably can to get it to a level of quality by May 14th. And then after that, your submission will be evaluated.
And it's a really great question too, coming in from Jaime, if you want to address that around the audience, and does it stop at just K through 12?
It's a wonderful question. I see Jules on the line. Interested to maybe hear perspectives on this too from somebody who's been working, but it doesn't necessarily. And I say that because it's probably the case that what works for some colleges can be adapted for K-12 and vice versa. And so if you don't sense that if you sense that your idea is limited by that, please contact us. But we would say, think about your idea, even if it describes a higher ed solution, try to think of a K-12 audience for which it would apply. Okay, we'll whip through the call to action real quick. No surprises here. We would love for you to amplify within your networks. You all are so wildly connected. Similar to the experience that you just had, we would encourage you to take this and to hold some space over the weekend, during the week, when you meet with colleagues, when you meet with other parents, to do just this, host conversations like this and get folks excited about the solutions, the submissions that could be part of this challenge, right? This is a real opportunity. We still have a little more than 2 weeks left here. So we would encourage you to send out the link here. The educationreopen.org is the website you can head to. I'm sure, obviously, for folks who submitted, you already know it, but send it far and wide to folks in your network and get people submitting. And yourselves included, obviously, for folks who haven't submitted already. I know people are doing some thinking and thinking about one or more solutions. Wendy, I'm looking at you. And feel free to take some time this afternoon or this weekend, next week to submit as soon as you can, because the sooner you submit, we have solutions coaches on hand who can provide some amazing feedback to you to get your idea even better in advance of the May 14th deadline here. We have our last feedback workshop coming up next week. Danielle, do you want to just mention kind of where, when?
Yeah, same time, same place, same bat channel here next week, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we will be talking about how to share and adapt your solution, how to tell the story, and how can you adapt your solution with feedback that you receive and in line with the needs that we have surfaced from school communities. And so we hope to see you next time. And then the following week, the last week, we will have office hours, which we will socialize and share with you all later. But we just want to have you joining us for these feedback workshops first, and then we will share more about what will be coming up before the deadline.
Will you play more cool music, Danielle?
Absolutely. Luisa is my most favorite thing in the world. I'm actually sad that I'm not in Florida right now. That's where I would be this time normally, somewhere in Miami. So so thanks for showing up, representing the Sunshine State today.
Thank you. Thank you guys for everything that you do.
Wonderful. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone,
Luisa,
for being
with
here.
us.
Yes, and we will see you. We'll see you next week, and keep an eye out on your inboxes, your email for the recording of today's session, and also more fabulous and fun updates as the weeks progress.
Yes, absolutely. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.